What's going on, people? Welcome back to another episode of the FF Ballbusters podcast. Today is Sunday, July 2nd. We're already in July. So years zooming by. My name is Will. Joining me is my co-host, Eric. Eric, how you feeling today, dog?
I'm feeling good, man. Pretty excited to get into this one. We're flip-flopping from our last video. We had some positive things to say last time. We're going to have some negative things to say this time, and that's always a good time. Not that I like shitting on people, but, you know, it makes for a good conversation.
Oh, no, we're about to get somewhat toxic with this. Not really. I think people are going to be upset, but at the same time, we're going to always try to come with the facts, give you guys, what our real thoughts are on these players. We're not going to sugarcoat it. We're not going to give you, the fluff. We're going to give you what it is and what we think it's going to be. And we're going to go through every position skills group, quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends. And we're just going to give you some guys that we believe may not perform up to their ADP, may perform underneath of it, may not be worth the pick that they're going at currently. And we're going to kick that off with the quarterback position, right, Eric?
I'm down, but let's label it as it is. We're talking bust today, bro. We're talking bust.
Yeah.
Do not draft.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, I'm going a little over the top. There's some of these guys that I would draft, but like Will said, not at their current ADP.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, let's get it kickstarted at the quarterback position. We're basing these rankings off of Fantasy Pros consensus rankings for 2023. So right now, my first quarterback to talk about is going to be Dak Prescott as the QB 9. And this may come as a little bit of surprise to you or some people in the audience that have watched our videos before. I've definitely been the one of the two of us kind of supporting Dak on this channel after a disappointing season last season. And I still believe that he is a higher end quarterback in this league. But I'm a little bit nervous about his fantasy outlook heading into this season. My only real worry, like with him specifically, is whether or not the offense is going to be as fast-paced and pass-heavy as it has been in years past. So we know Kellen Moore is out the door, and he's been replaced by Brian Schottenheimer, who does not have a really good history of high team pass volume. In his 12 seasons as an offensive coordinator in the NFL, his teams have only been top half of the league in total yards twice, and they've only been top half in pass attempts and pass yards once. So not a good track record of doing what we saw Kellen Moore do with this offense. Play calling duties technically lie with head coach Mike McCarthy right now, but he's been quoted as saying that he wants to run the damn ball this year and that he didn't think Kellen Moore ran the ball enough. So that's not very encouraging either. But also my worry isn't just with that, but more so about the players going around and after Dak Prescott in the rankings. So like QBs 10 through 17, if we look at Fantasy Pros right now, we're talking Deshaun Watson, Tua, Daniel Jones, Kirk Cousins, Geno Smith, Aaron Rodgers, Jared Goff, Anthony Richardson. I don't really see too much discernible difference between those guys in terms of their ability to produce as back-end QB1s in 2023. So, like, why would you draft the most expensive one is really my argument.
No, I completely agree with that. I liked a lot of those takes. I think that I think run the damn ball in a backfield with Tony Pollard and Deuce Vaughn is kind of and Ronald Jones, kind of a crazy statement. And you guys got to beef that up a little bit more.
A little bit.
But I like the sentiment. I'm like you guys know, if you watch this channel, I'm not a huge believer in Dak. I think he's more of a game manager type of quarterback. He has gotten things done before, like not to say he hasn't found success in fantasy. Obviously, we've seen him end with those top 3, top 1 finishes even in fantasy. But it's just, I think those days are behind us, and his price is sort of reflecting that he can still do that, and I don't think that's really the case. So I 100% agree with Eric over here that I think Dak Prescott overvalued. And this is a guy who I was going to talk about second, but I'm going to talk about him first just because you brought up Dak Prescott first. And this is a guy who's landing right before Dak Prescott, and that's going to be Mr. Trevor Lawrence.
Ooh,
yeah.
Interesting.
So let's talk about it, right? I've got nothing against the talent of Trevor Lawrence. I've got nothing against Trevor Lawrence, the player. I love Trevor Lawrence. He's actually the guy who got me into watching college football again. I took a pretty huge hiatus after, watching a lot of Maryland football, but getting back into watching him over there at Clemson was awesome for me. But I don't like the price that Trevor's going at right now because he's at the QB8 right now. And the reason why is because he's going in the same range as guys who were proven that I feel like I'd rather have on my team at this point. Like QB7 right now, Justin Herbert, a guy that we've seen end as the player with the second most fantasy points in fantasy total. people going after him. Dak Prescott, someone that, Eric just talked about that we've seen finish with those big finishes. Kirk Cousins, Deshaun Watson, all guys who have proven that they can put up 20 points per game in fantasy, which is something that Trevor Lawrence has not eclipsed yet in his career. It's like that we're trying to bake something into his ADP that we just haven't seen yet. We're hoping that this is the year he takes a bump up, and his price is reflecting that. And I just believe we haven't seen that kind of production out of him yet. Now, do I think the team is going to get better under Doug Peterson with the addition of Calvin Ridley, with Christian Kirk being healthy, with Evan Ingram returning to the team, Zay Jones, all of that? Yes, I do think the team's going to take a step up. But is it going to be a noticeable difference between him and, say, a player like you mentioned with that 10 to 17 range, like Geno Smith, who's finishing as the QB 16 right now, who actually finished with more fantasy points per game last year than Trevor Lawrence, and is coming into a team that also improved like Trevor Lawrence's team did, may have even improved more than Trevor Lawrence's team did, with the addition of Jackson Smith and Jigba and Zach Charbonnet to that offense with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett already. So why would I take Trevor Lawrence at the QB 8 at that price when I could take someone like Geno Smith at the QB 16 who's putting up similar or maybe even better numbers? I'm not going to say he's going to do better this year, but there is a possibility. And why would I do that when I could take Geno Smith at the QB 16 and beef up my team elsewhere and take value in players like players that are going around that spot that Trevor Lawrence is going in? So that's kind of my look towards it. I don't have anything against Trevor Lawrence, the player. I think he's going to take a step up this year, but I think his price tag is a little bit too expensive for the uncertainty that comes with him.
That is certainly a spicy one. I like it. Mm-hmm. I like a lot of what you said. He's certainly unproven. He's never eclipsed that 20 points per game mark. He's been outperformed by a lot of guys that are ranked below him. All of that is very well said. Personally, I do think he's pretty much ranked appropriately.
Okay.
But I certainly could see what you said come into play. And I think, like the Geno Smith type category who outperformed him last year, same improvements in the offense. Like maybe we don't see quite as big of a jump as people are projecting for Trevor Lawrence heading into 2023. Mm-hmm. But my next quarterback, I think, is also a little bit spicy. I'm talking Joe Burrow, the QB 5 right now.
Okay, let's get into it. Now,
similar to what you mentioned with Trevor Lawrence, this has almost nothing to do with him specifically. And similar to Dak, it's more about the players going around him. I'd much rather have Lamar Jackson and Justin Fields than Joe Burrow in 2023. Both of those guys finished one spot behind Joe Burrow last year in points per game and are coming into this year with much improved situations. Also, they were able to reach Burrow's level last year with very little in terms of their passing game. Fields was throwing to practice squad players all of last year, and it was his first year in a new offensive system. And in Lamar's case, basically all of his receivers and a lot of his offensive line were hurt for most of the year, and he was playing under Greg Roman, who refused to let him pass the ball. Now, he gets a new offensive coordinator that's much more pass-heavy. He gets way more weapons in the passing game. Justin Fields gets a slightly improved offensive line and DJ Moore, and they also drafted another receiver this year. So both of their situations are improving. I expect improvements from both of them as a passer to go along with their already really steady rushing floors. Whereas Joe Burrow, on the other hand, was historically efficient last year, like really, really incredibly efficient in terms of his completion percentage, in terms of his yards per attempt, his touchdown rate, all of that stuff. And so I do think he's an incredibly good quarterback. I think he's fantastically talented. And so maybe he can repeat that, but I really don't think that there's a chance that he's going to improve upon that level of efficiency that we saw from him last year. And so, if we're seeing improvements from Fields and improvements from Lamar with their rushing floors already, I think that they jump him in the rankings. And then we talk about some of the guys that you just talked about that are right behind Joe Burrow in Justin Herbert and Trevor Lawrence. I think they're in a similar tier and have just as good a chance to produce at the same level as Joe Burrow. So again, like I mentioned with Dak Prescott, why would you draft the highest priced one when you can have basically the same thing around or maybe even 3 rounds later?
No, I love that. I was recently watching some videos where I think there was a guy who was explaining trades and stuff like that, but he was talking about he was in a league where a quarterback scored 6 points instead of 4 points for passing touchdowns. And in a league like that, it skyrocketed people like Joe Burrow.
Absolutely.
But that's not the norm in fantasy football. We value, rushing stuff like that over passing touchdowns. So with that kind of disparity that's what leads to that kind of point disparity. So taking the guys with the higher rushing floor, like you said, it makes perfect sense over, Joe Burrow, even though we love Joe Burrow over here. This is a Joe Burrow supporting channel, of course.
Absolutely. Joe Shiesty gets it done. But that's a really good point. So if you're listening to this and you play in a 6-point per passing touchdown league, I wouldn't have this same argument. That wouldn't be the same case. Joe Burrow would be much higher in my rankings. But the typical standard for the fantasy industry is 4 points per passing touchdown, and that's most of the leagues that we play in as well. So that's kind of what I'm basing this off of.
Absolutely, and I 100% agree with that. Taking a look at the other quarterback that I have on here, I have the current QB 12 on Fantasy Pros, and that would be Mr. Daniel Jones of the New York Giants. I've never really been a huge believer in Daniel Jones, and, statistically, at least in fantasy, he hasn't been bad. But let's kind of break it down and explain why I think he's not going to do great next year. And I know that QB 12 is lower than the finish he had last year already. I know he finished as a QB 10 last year, so let's take a step through this. Last year, I believe, Daniel Jones received a huge bump through his rushing floor, right? Vanilla Vic, people were calling him all sorts of stuff. He had 700 rushing yards, 7 rushing touchdowns on 120 attempts. But in my opinion, I don't feel like that's super sustainable unless that's the direction they're taking this offense in completely, unless they've completely shifted over to that. Because taking a look at prior years, obviously his rookie year, 45 rushing attempts, 279 yards, 2 touchdowns. The next year, 65 rushing attempts, 423 yards, 1 touchdown. The following year, 62 rushing attempts, 298, and 2 touchdowns. So to say that his rushing floor is going to be what it was last year, I don't quite believe that until I see it again. That season's going to have to become more of a norm than an anomaly that it is right now, and it's just an anomaly at this point. His passing metrics last year went down, and he also cut down his interceptions, so the team was able to turn around sort of the turnover machine that he was, but he only threw 15 touchdowns, and when you're doing that, you're really going to limit your ceiling quite a bit, no matter how many rushing touchdowns you run in. And at the addition of weapons that he has, they haven't really been all that inspiring. I love Darren Waller as a player, but the fact of the matter is he's good when he's on the field, but he's only done that 20 times in the last 2 years, so you can't really count on him to be out there. And and it's crazy because out of the receiving core, the person receiving the most hype out of that receiving core is Paris Campbell. And what? Outside of that, they drafted Jalen Hyatt, who's sort of a vertical threat, but last year, I believe Daniel Jones's throw depth was very low. It was like 6.5 yards, something crazy low, which doesn't match up with Jalen Hyatt's profile whatsoever. So it's tough for me to say, unless this team is able to game plan, able to actually unlock Daniel Jones like we thought, people were saying that he did last year. I don't really see that too much. I just see that they shifted focus and made him more of a game manager and just made him hold on to the ball more than throwing it. I need to see him actually take a step up as a quarterback before I'm ready to say, like, oh, yeah, he's going to perform as a top 12 quarterback from here on out.
Yeah, I like that. I'm very much in the same boat as you, where I'm not really a Daniel Jones believer. I think that contract was kind of crazy. I think that they will soon find that out if they haven't already. The only thing that I would say and push back to what you mentioned about the rushing change is that was the first year under Brian Daboll.
Absolutely.
And so with the new system, like, we could see that continue, but you're absolutely right. Like, we've had a long track history of what we've seen from Daniel Jones, as we want to see that more consistently. And yeah, also the receiver thing is spot on. Like, the two guys that have been getting the most hype, Darren Waller and Paris Campbell, haven't been on the field for like half the games for the past 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
And yeah, Jalen Hyatt's like running with the threes. It's not an inspiring group around him right now. So I absolutely agree with you.
Yes, sir. And then with that being said, we're going to move on to the running back position now, and we're going to have Eric kick that one off again as well. I'm actually excited for this one because I feel like we got 2 different players on this as well.
Yeah, we coordinated a little bit. I asked Will if he had this guy on the list, and he did not. It's somebody that we've talked about plenty on this channel before, but my first guy on here is Kenneth Walker as the RB14 on Fantasy Pros. I want to preface this by saying, do I think Kenneth Walker is good at football? Yes. Do I think that he will produce at a usable level for fantasy this year? Yes. But do I think he deserves to be ranked as the RB14 heading into 2023? Absolutely not. The things that bolstered Kenneth Walker's fantasy finish last year were his carry total, his red zone opportunities, and his breakaway runs. Those breakaway runs are really the only thing that I expect to continue into this year. He was 11th in the league in carries, and that's definitely going to go down with Zach Charbonnet on the team. He was 3rd in the league in red zone usage. That's absolutely going to go down with Charbs on the team. And we will also see his already low target volume go down as well with the new running back on the team. Also, I feel like people have pretty much convinced themselves that Kenneth Walker is the next Nick Chubb, but he's not nearly as efficient. Walker was 38th in true yards per carry, 29th in yards per touch, 40th in fantasy points per opportunity, and 148th in total EPA. Walker also finished as the RB14 in points per game last year. And that year, and this year, they add another really talented running back in Zach Charbonnet to the backfields. They also draft JSN. And with that draft pick, I expect them to run a lot more 11 personnel and be more pass heavy than they were even last year. So I don't really understand how we're ranking him in the same spot that he was last year when I expect the situation and his efficiency to probably be worse.
No, I 100% agree with that. It's tough to be optimistic in a guy who another channel kind of broke it down a little bit better too. I can't remember who it is off the top of my head. I wish I could, so I give him some credit. But at the end of the day, they were kind of talking about Kenneth Walker and they were talking about Zach Charbonnet, and they were saying that like the Seahawks are a team that can contend right now. Really, they can contend for a Super Bowl. They made it to the playoffs last year. They've proven they got the talent to be able to make it. It's just a matter of they made it that far, and then they decided to bring in another running back in the second round. And, that can't be inspiring for Kenneth Walker, Like, that's only going to take away from Kenneth Walker. So it's tough, like you said, and it's tough because he hasn't been the most efficient guy ever, in that backfield either. So you want to see him take a step up if he's going to be ranked this high, and you want to see him actually have a clear path to getting that, RB1, sort of fringe RB1 production. And I don't think he really has a clear path to that now with Zach Charbonnet back there. And rolling that into my running back, because I actually picked the guy that's one spot in front of him. I picked Travis Etienne.
Okay. Oh, okay.
And I kind of view him very similarly to Kenneth Walker. They brought in not exactly an equally talented running back like they did with Kenneth Walker, but Tank Bigsby is no slouch whatsoever. Travis Etienne, one of the best graded running backs coming into the draft in terms of production, in terms of talent himself. But we just haven't really seen that translate over completely at the NFL level. He's definitely talented. I'm not taking any of that away from him. However, last year he finishes the RB23 in points per game, and, that's when he had most of the opportunity in this backfield. He was the clear number one. And Doug Peterson has made it nothing but more clear that he wants more of a committee in the backfield, which is why they drafted Tank Bigsby. They want to have more of the love spread around. And Travis Etienne, not great on the goal line, so probably looking for a new guy to take that role, and that's probably going to be Tank Bigsby. And I'm not saying I don't think Travis Etienne is good, similarly like you said with Kenneth Walker, so I'm not going to beat a dead horse here. I just don't think that the path that allows him to finish as an RB13 or higher is getting clearer as time goes along. I feel like it's just getting muddier and muddier, and that's not exactly what you want to see out of a guy that you're investing that kind of draft capital into. So I do have Travis Etienne up here too.
Yeah, I like it. I think I'm probably a little bit more of a believer in Travis Etienne than I am in Kenneth Walker, just like efficiency based. His underlying metrics as a runner, I think, were a little bit better than what we saw from Kenneth Walker last year, but very similar situation like you mentioned. I think goal line opportunities are going to go way down. We hope, last year we hoped he was going to be a big time receiver. He was going to catch a lot of balls. We didn't see that from him, and Tank Bigsby is an underrated receiver as well, which you also mentioned. So I can certainly see the worry there.
But if we need, I feel like that's also a point I didn't write down, but just something that I got to mention. Trevor Lawrence's check down rate last year, pretty bad as well. Like, he didn't check down a whole lot. So we do need to see that improve or become more of the game plan as well before we can really bank on that. Because Go ahead.
I'm sorry. More than pretty bad. I just want to emphasize the point that you're making. He was literally last in the league in check down rate by a large margin.
Yeah.
Similar. I don't remember the source that I found this from, but it was the chart with check down rate, and he was dead last with all of the quarterbacks being way up higher than he was.
Yeah, I think his was like 5.4%. It was something abysmal, something really low.
Yeah.
So I need to see that improve before I can really be optimistic in Travis Etienne, but I think the talent's there. It's just, I feel like it's a game planning thing more than anything. But yeah, I do have him up here in terms of people that I don't super believe he's going to finish where he's ranked at right now.
Yeah. 3.4% check down rate.
3.4, not 5.4.
It's bad.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I like that a lot. My next running back on this list, I kind of hope ruffles some feathers. I want some people to change their opinion on this guy. I think he is a little bit polarizing. There's definitely people on either end of the spectrum, but I feel like the people that are in favor of this guy have been really pounding the table. They've been really vocal. I'm talking about Alexander Madison at the RB23.
I love it.
Yeah. Some people are comparing Madison's situation to that of like the Tony Pollard and Zeke situation, where the long-time washed starter is gone and the younger, more efficient and explosive back is going to take over. In Tony Pollard's case, absolutely agree with that. I think that's true. But for Madison, he hasn't been efficient or explosive yet throughout his 4 years in the league. His yards per carry has steadily gone down in each year of his career. And in 2021, the year that he was given the most opportunity, he was the least efficient across the board that he's ever been. Last year, he ranked 57th in true yards per carry, 49th in evaded tackles, 79th in breakaway runs, and 57th in yards created. He's never eclipsed 500 rushing yards in a season. And so, like, people that think he's good, like, I'm seeing people say Madison will put the same numbers up that Dalvin Cook did in this offense. But, like, he's nowhere near as good as Cook was. If he was, he would have been incorporated way more into this offense in years past. And, like, I don't know, they wouldn't be talking about using a committee in this backfield, which is what the reports are now that Dalvin Cook has been released.
Yeah, people thought that Alexander Madison is as good as Dalvin Cook. That just literally makes zero sense. I don't know.
No.
It makes zero sense, guys. Like, he literally would be out there on the field more. Like, he did start to eat into Dalvin Cook's volume more last year, but I think that was more attributed to Dalvin Cook and his performance more so than Alexander Madison and his talent. You know, I think.
And his injury worries.
Exactly. So it's not, he's on the field because he needed to be on the field last year, not because he was this transcendent talent that's just behind this other transcendent talent. That's not how that works.
Yeah, and like adding on to that, Alexander Madison has never been obviously the workhorse in this offense. We've only seen him get spot starts and stuff like that. But with a whole offseason for NFL defenses to prepare for him specifically,
He's getting
I think
locked.
we're going to see a lot different performance than what we've seen from Madison in years past.
Yeah, he's getting locked up. Absolutely. I believe in that, and I agree with you 100% there, too. It's funny because we pick different players, but we're always around in the same range. Because you went the RB23. I've got the RB27. Somebody we talked about on this channel before, too, Mr. DeAndre Swift. So the guy that I picked, sorry about that, guys, some technical difficulties on this side, but the guy that I picked, DeAndre Swift, running back 27, he was third in fantasy points per opportunity in 2023, second in yards per touch, and fifth in breakaway run rate, but I don't believe that's going to be the case going forward. I believe those are anomalies as well, and we're going to talk about why. So DeAndre Swift last year saw 70 targets despite playing on 40% or more snaps in only 3 games last year. So that's a pretty high passing volume off of sort of low playing. I guess very high efficiency off of. But essentially, he played with Jared Goff. So Jared Goff checked down the running backs quite a lot. That is not going to be the case with Jalen Hurts because last year, the Eagles targeted running backs 61 times in general. That's 9 less targets than DeAndre Swift got by himself last year. So let's just look at that. Without that receiving upside, I think it's going to be really hard to be confident that Swift is going to return on value just based on rushing upside alone because I don't think he's going to get many goal line opportunities. Last year, he had 3 goal line opportunities, and in his entire career, he's never been higher than 25th in red zone touches. And I don't think that's going to, magically change now that he's on a new team. But with that being said, it's tough for me to say that DeAndre Swift is going to return on his value. It's tough for me to say that they're even going to use him for the stuff that he's the best at with the Eagles, especially since they have Rashad Penny back there in the backfield. They've still got Jalen Hurts, obviously a quarterback, just paid him a lot of money. He eats into that rushing floor as well. And they just don't really throw to running backs. So it's hard for me to say here where the upside is for DeAndre Swift. I guess you're hoping that he turns into this premier rushing running back, but I don't think that's really going to be the case because it's not something we've seen out of him his entire career.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think the efficiency will continue just because of the offense that he's going into and the offensive line he's going to be running behind. But the volume is going to be down, and the passing volume specifically, which is where he makes his money, is going to be way, way down. You mentioned it, Jared Goff. His check down rate is more than double what we saw from Jalen Hurts last year, significantly higher. And then you mentioned the red zone work as well. Jalen Hurts was maybe the best red zone weapon in the NFL last year, and he's going to continue to be that. They also bring in Rashad Penny, who has been the most efficient runner in football the past 2 years. I don't know why he wouldn't get first dibs at red zone work and also probably first and second down work. And then they also still have Kenny Gainwell on the team, who they really, really like and have shown support for throughout this entire offseason. He's going to get some passing work to go along with DeAndre Swift as well. So just a lot of mouths to feed, and I see it being tough for Swift to reach this level of production.
Absolutely. And then taking a look at the next set of players we got the wide receivers. Who are we kicking off the wide receivers with, Eric?
So this one, I don't know if this is spicy. I feel like people have been kind of falling off of him a little bit, but track record would suggest otherwise. I'm talking Devonte Adams at wide receiver 8. I think that the transition from Derek Carr to Jimmy G at quarterback is going to be really detrimental. The statistics on wide receivers with elite target shares, meaning 25+% target shares, playing with a new quarterback, show that on average there's a significant drop off in both target share and target rate going into that next season. But I think the even bigger issue is the stylistic difference between these two quarterbacks. A very large portion, like a really large portion of Adams' fantasy production came off of deep balls last year, including 10 of his 14 receiving touchdowns coming off of balls thrown 15 plus yards down the field. And kind of backing that up, like Derek Carr was among the league leaders in deep ball attempts at 4.8 per game, air yards at 313 per game, and air yards per attempt at 9.4. Whereas Jimmy G, on the other hand, threw only 2.5 deep balls per game, only 192 air yards per game, and only 6.9 air yards per attempt. So way, way down in all of those categories in the area where we saw Devonte Adams excel and create most of his fantasy production. And then lastly, Derek Carr ranked 9th in EPA on deep pass attempts last year, while Jimmy G ranked 42nd. So it's not just the amount of attempts, but it's also the effectiveness of those deep ball attempts where Jimmy G lacks. So that's where most of my argument lies with Devonte Adams. Obviously, I still think he's incredibly talented, one of the best receivers in the league. He's just not going to get the ball in the areas of the field where it's most dangerous.
I have an interesting question for you. It's not a good question. It's just an interesting one. Okay. So if Jimmy G, for some reason, he can't be the starter for this team because, physical, can't pass it, they end up cutting him. Whatever it is they end up doing, the Raiders going to Raider. What if they were to bring in a quarterback like Carson Wentz, who's still a free agent? Would that change your outlook on Devonte Adams at all?
Yeah, I mean, it would have to a little.
Okay.
Honestly, I might like that better.
Okay.
We saw this kind of in Indianapolis with Michael Pittman, right? Where Carson Wentz wasn't a good passer. He wasn't a good fantasy asset, but Michael Pittman was actually pretty good because he did push the ball down the field and he did provide those deep ball opportunities, even if he wasn't the most accurate there or anywhere across the field. He just gave him the opportunity in those deep areas. And so I think that could be helpful for Devonte Adams, but I don't think that he's anywhere near what Derek Carr is.
Yeah. So
it's still going to be a downgrade from last year by far.
No, I like that, though. I do like that because that's a guy who's going high, who we don't think is going to perform the way people think he's going to, and not because of himself. He's obviously voiced his concerns quite a bit with the team, with the talent that they brought in as well. So he's not a big believer in the Raiders as well. So it's going to be tough.
Yeah.
Looking at the first wide receiver, I have the current wide receiver 15. I got Mr. Deebo Samuel from San Francisco. I think a lot of people are still kind of holding on to that 2021 season for Deebo, and, I'm going to be the one to say it if no one else has told you. It's not going to happen again, especially as long as Christian McCaffrey's in town. That's never going to happen again. Because he's just never going to get that kind of rushing work again, because why would you when you have an elite running back in the backfield? That just doesn't make sense. But taking a look at Deebo's receiving statistics last year, they kind of took a nosedive. He had 7 less yards per reception, 1.5 yards less per route and run, and he scored 8 less fantasy points per game last year, which is a huge difference between that and 2021. His total touchdowns also went down 65%. That's more of a wishy-washy statistic, but still a statistic nonetheless. That's probably due to just less opportunity because obviously he was scoring off a lot of those rushing plays that he had in 2021. But one that people don't really look at a whole lot, if Brock Purdy is to return as the starter, which I'm not saying he is because I don't know what's going to happen in San Francisco. It could be any of those 3 guys over there as a starter. But if so, Deebo statistically did average 2 less fantasy points per game with Brock Purdy at the helm than any other quarterback on the team. So, that's not really like a kill shot or anything like that or a condemnation of Deebo Samuel. Just something to take into account because there are other options on this team that you could look at, but we're going to talk about that more later because I'm not quite done with San Francisco. Just a little bit of a spoiler alert for going ahead. But yeah, Deebo Samuel is up here on the list of people that I think are being overvalued. And yeah, I don't think he's going to have that quite. He's never going to be able to capture the same magic as 2021. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, that was another guy who had historic efficiency, especially in the touchdown category in 2021. So he absolutely will not be repeating that. But I like all of the reasons that you stated, Christian McCaffrey being there, we saw a huge dip in his production and efficiency across the board. Also, Brandon Ayuk has been getting a ton of hype so far this offseason. I do expect him to probably be the main wide receiver target, at least on this team, and Deebo filling that gadget role really, really well. I think even you wouldn't argue that he's still incredibly talented. He's
absolutely
the best.
He's a great football player.
Yeah. But from a fantasy perspective, he's not going to reach the level of production needed to be that wide receiver 15.
Absolutely.
Okay, so this did change from when I last had it. When I checked yesterday, when I was putting this list together, the guy that I have next was the wide receiver 15. He has moved down a little bit, but we'll still talk about him here. DK Metcalf is my second wide receiver as the wide receiver 17. If we're talking about career production, Metcalf has only had one season over 14 half PPR points per game, and that was 3 years ago. Since then, Tyler Lockett has outperformed him the past 2 years, and he's outperformed him in 3 of the 4 seasons that Metcalf has been in the league. And now JSN gets added to the Seahawks offense. And I wouldn't be shocked if he pushes both of those guys, Lockett and Metcalf, for the league lead in targets. For the team lead in targets. The only positive that I see for Metcalf this year compared to past years is that I think he probably will return to a role better suited for him, where he's a field stretcher with a higher ADAT, and that's where we have seen him be more efficient and more effective. But I think that that's going to come at a drastic decrease to his total passing volume, his targets, and his receptions. And so if he's been outproduced by the supposed wide receiver 2 in his offense 3 of the 4 years that he's been in the league, and then JSN comes in, who I think is going to be more of a volume receiver than even DK Metcalf, how could we possibly have him ranked as a back end wide receiver 1, high end wide receiver 2, when he might be the third target in his offense? Similar to a lot of the guys on this list, I think he's still incredibly talented. I believe in him as a football player. I think he's a baller, but fantasy production is going to come from volume for him, and he's just not going to get it this year.
No, I absolutely agree. DK Metcalf's a guy who I've always sort of thought was he's an athlete, he's a specimen, this and that, but as a wide receiver, he's not the best in the world. And, the guys on the team, like you said, who are the more polished wide receivers are probably going to end up getting more of the good looks because they're able to separate better, they're able to do this, they're able to do that just better. The field might open up a little bit more for DK because they do have to worry about the other guys a little bit more.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, I just don't believe, like you said, I don't think it's going to be something that catapults him. I think he's just going to be a part of a great offense, not like a great player in a great offense. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I do think he's going to be hyper efficient because he returns to that high ADAT role. Like you said, the offense is going to be opened up. He's not going to be getting double teamed and stuff like that. But he's not going to see anywhere near the volume that he has so far throughout his career, which is the whole argument that I made. So don't need to be repetitive, but yeah, the efficiency will be there. It's just not the production that you're going to want to see.
Absolutely. Taking a look at mine, it's going to sound weird because the guy that I'm talking about right now is the wide receiver 31, but I do believe in the guys who are being drafted after him more so than I believe in him as a prospect, and that person is Michael Pittman of the Indianapolis Colts.
This one needs to be talked about. I'm glad that you have him on the list.
Yeah. So let's talk about it because Anthony Richardson, this is an Anthony Richardson pro channel. We love Anthony Richardson over here. But the reason that we love Anthony Richardson is because of the rushing floor that he has, sort of the rushing ability that he has, and the fact that that's going to help catapult him into that sort of, QB 10 or QB1 range with the, top 10 QBs and being able to finish in that, have that sort of realm of possibilities for him. But we haven't really talked a whole lot about him as a passer or him just throwing the ball. We know he's had accuracy issues, stuff like that. We've seen Michael Pittman deal with quarterbacks with accuracy issues as well. Why can't I say accuracy? But even if we're just taking a look at Pittman himself as a player statistically, last year's ADOT was 6.9 yards, which was 92nd in the league. He also saw 6.6 yards per target. So sort of those deeper targets we talked about that he got with Carson Wentz got dialed back completely last year, probably due to the quarterback room because nobody was good back there, if we're being honest. Nobody performed. But the thing that concerns me is that he was able to do all this, but that was with 141 targets and 99 catches. So yeah, he didn't have great quarterback play, but you can't say he didn't have the opportunity to make something happen himself. And he kind of proved last year I don't know if he can really make everything happen himself. He's not really one of those guys. He's a good wide receiver, but he's not one of those guys that can make everything happen. Now, Shane Steichen stepping in and retooling this offense, Michael Pittman could start getting deployed in more creative ways, and maybe this year he won't be 108th in deep targets anymore. We're hoping that's going to change. I'm just not confident that year one Anthony Richardson is going to be great for his weapons group, especially not the guy who got locked up by destroying and Chase Claypool in YouTube videos. We're going to throw that in there too. But yeah, I just in terms of just year one Anthony Richardson and just Michael Pittman being the player that he is, I would like to see a year of this sort of relationship developing before I'm willing to throw Michael Pittman back up there with the guys who can perform for fantasy. Guys going after him, I believe in more, just taking a look at the list. Just to say, Marquise Brown, Traylon Burks, DeAndre Hopkins, Deontay Johnson, Jordan Addison, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Kadarius Toney, Cortland Sutton, Rashad Bateman, Quentin Johnston, just to name a few that I would probably rather have on my team than Michael Pittman, and they're going after Michael Pittman.
Yeah, like most of those guys, it's not even close.
No.
Not even close. Yeah, the pass volume for this Colts team is going to be so low. It's going to be ridiculous. Like, why would they when they have two of the best rushing threats in the entire league in Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor back there?
Yeah.
Like, they're going to be just fine running the ball 35 plus times a game. Yeah, so I see what you're saying with the volume going down. And yeah, we've yet to see Anthony Richardson be an accurate quarterback, so we're not going to see necessarily high efficiency. I do think he is going to provide some deep targets, but it's going to be few and far between because they're just not going to be passing the ball enough. So I like that take a whole lot.
Hell yeah. All right, and then with that being said, we're going to roll forward into the tight end position. This one is going to get, I feel like this one's going to get a little bit weird just because tight ends are always a weird position anyways, but who are we starting this one off with, Eric?
You know who it is.
Say it.
You know who it is.
Say
It's
it.
Kyle Pitts.
Yeah.
It's Kyle Pitts.
Yeah.
Tight end 6. I love him in Dynasty. I absolutely still believe in him, the player. He's gonna turn it around. It's gonna happen. And he got drafted at 20 years old. He's got so many years, Dynasty-wise. Buy him, please.
Absolutely.
But for 2023, I don't think it's happening, bro. I don't think it's happening. I think he's going to continue to be incredibly efficient. He was one of the most efficient tight ends in football last year. One of the highest target shares, one of the highest target rate. Well, the highest target rate, the highest air yard share, the highest in deep targets, all that stuff. I expect that to continue. But the pass volume for Atlanta, just like we talked about with Indianapolis, is going to be so low.
And it's going even further down.
Yeah, it's going to continue to go down because last year, in 2022, the Falcons were the run-heaviest team in the NFL with like average to below average running backs. Now they draft Bijan Robinson at number 8 overall. Are you kidding me?
You think they're gonna run the ball less?
Bro, they ran it 559 times last year. They might run it 700 times this year, bro. Why? Like, I don't see that going down. And with Desmond Ridder at quarterback, I don't know why it would go down. Like, I just haven't seen anything from him that proves to me that he's going to be the quarterback that's going to lead your offense to success. And also, we saw really high pass volumes and target rates for Drake London, who's sitting across from Kyle Pitts. I expect that to continue as well. They're going to be competing and eating into each other's volume all year long. So yeah, this isn't an argument about talent. This has been the case for most of the guys on my list so far, and probably on yours as well.
Mm-hmm.
We believe in these guys as talents. It's just the situation and the volume that these guys are going to receive isn't really worthy of where they're currently being ranked.
Yeah, it's like outside of Daniel Jones, 100% believe in that. But it's like you said though. It's Kyle Pitts. I was wondering when we were finally going to make it around to this point. I think we finally reached it where we got to be more realistic about Kyle Pitts until he shows us something different. But in terms of like talent himself, absolutely, I'm buying Kyle Pitts every time. Dynasty, I'm keeping him on my team. He's one of those guys who's gonna pan out. They just got to put a better situation around him or get Arthur Smith out of there. One of those two things has to change. And before it does, I'm not taking him at the tight end 6. So, yeah, I love that. I love that take.
So just to talk about that real quickly, and Arthur Smith has been pissing me off with the usage of Kyle Pitts.
He's kind of a good coach.
He is a good coach. He uses his puts his team's strengths at the forefront and allows his team to win in the ways that they are able to. Like when we saw him in Tennessee with Ryan Tannehill and AJ Brown, like we saw really good fantasy usage for both of them. It was a lot of play action offense. He put them both in their best possible position, using their best strengths to their advantage. So I think if we see this offense with a better quarterback at the helm, we could see more pass volume, higher efficiency, and better fantasy production from the weapons in this offense. But right now, we just don't have that.
About to say, you also just unlocked a little bit of a memory for me, too. The fact that they brought in Jonnu Smith this year as well at tight end.
Yep.
Forgot about that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Jonnu Smith had good years in Tennessee as well, so there's also the possibility that he could eat into a little bit of it.
I don't really think he's going to beat him out in competition-wise, but
no,
he's going to get some opportunity at least. Like,
yeah, there's familiarity there where he might get a little bit, but I'm not too worried about him specifically.
Yeah. And taking a look at mine, current tight end 9. It's so funny, bro. It's so easy to talk shit about tight ends unless you're Travis Kelce. It's so easy. But the tight end 9 that I'm going to go with is Mr. Evan Ingram of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, he finished well last year, absolutely. But a lot of his success was found towards the end of last season. And before that, in weeks 1 through 12, he was the tight end 19. Tight end 19. After that, he was able to catapult himself. And I don't think that's quite sustainable, but we're going to keep going. There's tight ends around him that I feel like I'd rather have on my team just based on consistency, based on team usage. And that would be Pat Freiermuth, guys like him, guys like David Njoku, guys like Chig that I'd probably rather have on my team based on usage. And I just think his price tag is a little bit too expensive for a guy who found a majority of his value during that last stretch of the season. And I know some people are optimistic. I'm one of those people, too, that I feel like if a player's getting used a certain way towards the end of the season, you kind of got to believe they're going to keep getting used that way at the start of next season, you know, because they figured out that's one of their guys. But I don't think that's going to be the case because this team has changed quite a bit in just this offseason with the addition of Calvin Ridley, guys like Zay Jones and Christian Kirk getting moved around in their roles. Guys like Evan Ingram, who was number 1 amongst tight ends in terms of slot routes ran. I don't think that's going to continue if you got guys like Calvin Ridley who are healthy, guys like Christian Kirk who are healthy. I think it's going to eat into those looks. So I don't think that same volume that he got last year, he's going to continue to get this year. It's going to get eaten into, especially by Calvin Ridley alone. But it's just tough to believe he's going to get that same quality and that same production going forward. They franchise tagged him as well, so not a huge team investment behind him, but could also be a career year. This could be the year that he gets the most targets of his entire career just to see what he can do. I'm just not super confident that that's the direction that the team is heading in.
I can see it. I understand your argument. I think this is the first one where I do disagree with you.
Okay.
I actually think that Evan Ingram is appropriately ranked, if not maybe slightly underranked, barely. I believe more that we are going to see a continuation from what we saw at the end of last year. And I think that, you know, Calvin Ridley does come in, and I think I'm super high on him. If you guys have watched the channel, he's one of my sleepers and kind of undervalued guys that we talked about in our last video, that we both talked about, actually. But I think if anybody's going to be displaced in this offense in terms of their amount of volume, it's going to be Zay Jones. So I think Evan Ingram will continue to hold his place on the totem pole for the Jaguars. But, you know, we've also seen him riddled with injury throughout his career. So if that rears its ugly head again, then obviously we could see him drop in the rankings. There's a lot of outs for him, for sure, in terms of his ability to fall down these rankings. So I could certainly see it. I'm just not necessarily in total agreement, but that's all right.
No, that's fair. Like I said, it's tight ends, man. It's tough out here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if you guys caught it, but while Will was going through some of his players that he thinks should be valued higher than Evan Ingram, I gave a little wink to the camera. You talked about Pat Freiermuth. He is my next guy on this list.
Okay, getting spicy. Let's hear it. I love it.
He's currently the tight end 8, and I think for a lot of the same reasons that I talked about with Kyle Pitts, I'm worried about the amount of mouths to feed. I'm worried about the volume, the pass volume. I think the rushing volume is going to be high for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And also I'm worried about quarterback play. All the same things that we talked about with Atlanta. Najee Harris is one of the highest volume running backs in the league, and I think will continue to be with Kenny Pickett at the helm. There's no reason that they would trust him to lead this offense. And also, there's just tons of other mouths to feed in the passing game, including Najee Harris, but we're talking Deontay Johnson, one of the most targeted receivers in the league. George Pickens, hopefully taking another step up. Allen Robinson was just added to this offense, and I think he could be incorporated at least a little bit. And I think that he could also potentially eat into some of the red zone work that we saw be Pat Freiermuth's bread and butter so far throughout his career. That's kind of where he's made his fantasy gold. So, yeah, I think Pat Freiermuth has been fairly efficient, and he's proven to be a good tight end in this league so far. But at tight end 8, there's just guys below him that I would rather have on my team this year. David Njoku, Evan Ingram, Dalton Schultz, Cole Kmet, Greg Dulcich, I think are all guys that I'd probably rather roster than Pat Freiermuth in 2023.
That's fair. I'm pretty optimistic towards Pat Freiermuth. I think that, his whole career in terms of volume and having to compete, I think he's always kind of had to compete for volume. Najee's been there his entire career. Deontay Johnson's been there his entire career. They brought in George Pickens, but obviously, they had Chase Claypool before that. Allen Robinson, I keep forgetting he's a person, so I'm not going to consider him real competition until he does something again.
So that's fair.
Yeah.
But how are you gonna talk about Chase Claypool and then say that Allen Robinson shit?
I'm talking in terms of volume, not talent. If we're talking talent, I'd take Allen Robinson. But I forget that Allen Robinson plays football. That's how little he's really been on the field these last 4 years. So no, it's fair. Tough. It's tough.
Yeah.
But I do see that, I see what you're saying, though. I do agree with some of the things you're saying. I'm a little bit more optimistic towards Pat. I think he'll be able to make it happen because he kind of has always made it happen. But I can understand the concerns 100%.
Real quick, something I didn't even mention in my argument.
Mm-hmm.
Last year, Pat Freiermuth finished as the tight end 13 in points per game.
Yeah, and him being ranked at the tight end 8, not great.
It's just a little high for me. But
that's fair. We're going to see this year, though. We're going to see. And then if we're going to get real controversial here, we got my last tight end that's up here. It's the current tight end 4, and it is Mr. Kittle.
Ooh. Okay.
Now, let's talk about it because I love George Kittle. I love George Kittle, the player, the lumberjack. I think he's one of the toughest guys out there on the field. But I don't think the success that he was able to find last year was sustainable. So during that monster stretch where he was doing really well last year, he was averaging 1.5 touchdowns per game. I don't believe that metric's going to continue. I don't think that's anything we can really expect from any player week in and week out. So that's definitely going to trail off. And George Kittle does have some amazing spike weeks, for sure. We've seen it. There's weeks where George Kittle put up 30, 40 points, might win your team a game a week. And that's amazing. But let's look at some of the people who are being drafted in the same range as George Kittle. Hell, we'll actually just take a look at the people being drafted after George Kittle, just to name a few. We got Keenan Allen, guy who's hyper involved in his offense, might be aging out of the league a little bit, but still has the volume, still is targeted. No real reason to think he's going to take a step back besides injury. Calvin Ridley, guy who also has proven he can be a target monster, volume monster, can produce as a wide receiver 1, even if he's the backup wide receiver in his offense. Not backup wide receiver 1, no, wide receiver 2 in his offense. We've also got Jalen Hurts and Lamar Jackson, both going afterwards. These are the kind of guys that you're kind of giving up in order to get a guy who's not even the most targeted receiver in his offense. That would be Deebo and Brandon Ayuk. And I think in this instance where it's San Francisco, I think the best option in this instance is the cheapest guy, and that's going to be Brandon Ayuk. Of course, outside of Christian McCaffrey, of course. But I think that Ayuk is the best buy out of all the receivers on this team in terms of cost, in terms of what you're going to get back for him, and just in terms of talent. George Kittle, of course, has talent, has volume, but I just don't think that the cost you're getting him at is worth it for what you're giving up for what you can get later on in the draft.
Okay, you've swayed me a little bit here. I think I'm pro George Kittle in terms of where he's ranked amongst the other tight ends.
Yes.
But I think you make a really good point as far as how he should be tiered and valued versus the other positions. I think that makes a lot of sense. The opportunity cost and the draft cost of where he's going amongst these other guys is probably too high. So I like that take a lot. It's not something that I necessarily considered. He is ranked currently as the tight end 4 amongst tight ends, and I think he deserves to be there.
Absolutely.
Outside of Kelsey and Andrews and maybe Hawkinson, you're not going to get week-to-week consistency. That's not something that you can bank on from anybody else at the tight end position. So I'd rather have those week-winning spike weeks out of Kittle that he probably does more often than anybody else below him. So that would be my argument for him. But I really, really do like what you mentioned there in terms of his comparison to other positions. So I like that a lot.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that.
Absolutely.
And that's going to round out our list. Wow, I'm really bad at keeping track of these things. I'm sorry, guys. Every single time we pause like that has been, I forgot that I'm hosting. So I apologize for that. But with that being said, that's going to wrap up our list of our, draft bust, I guess is what we're going to call this list. Is because it was going to be titled. So, go ahead, click that motherfucker. You already did. But... But we really just wanted to take this time to make sure we gave you guys our real legitimate thoughts on some of these guys who are going pretty highly in drafts that we think maybe the brakes should be pumped a little bit, because none of these guys, except for Daniel Jones, we're not saying any of them are bad whatsoever. You know what I'm saying? We think all these guys are going to perform. It's just whether they're worth the cost that you're getting them at. And maybe by August, this stuff will shift around. It might even change by then. People might come to these consensuses. But this early into the process, this is how we're looking at it. And we're trying to get you the best bang for your buck if you're doing drafts right now. This is how we're looking at it. So, Eric, you got anything for the people before we roll out of here?
I think Alexander Madison might also be a little bad, but that's neither here nor there. Please, if you did watch until the end, one, we appreciate you, but also could you please do that good YouTube stuff for us? Leave a like on the channel, leave a like on this video. That absolutely helps us out a ton. Subscribe to the channel. That'll keep you in the loop for all the videos that we have coming out down the road. Hit that notification bell for the same reasons that I just mentioned before. Check out all the links down in the description below. We have plenty of sponsors, whether that be Underdog, whether it be Dynasty Hunter, whether it be League Winners, whether it be Do Numbers for the apparel and merch, which I'm wearing right now, sweet hoodies, sweet t-shirts, hats, and stuff like that, discount codes, all that good stuff linked in the description below. So please support them, and that also supports us. So thank you very much for watching until the end. If you did, is there anything else you want to say before we finish this thing up? Did I cover it?
I mean, yeah, I think you got everything right there. So pretty much same as we tell you guys always. You made it this far into the video. As always, we love you, and we will catch you in the next one. Peace.
Peace.